I used to get so nervous in interviews. When that video call started, I felt like jelly. My breathing was tight, I would stumble over my words. It was not a good feeling. And then I thought to myself, why am I getting so nervous? And I realized it came from the fear that my interviewer would ask me something that I wasn't prepared for. That he or she might ask me a question that I did not have the answer to. And furthermore, I did not have all the interviewing secrets that I know now. Back then, they would have helped me greatly. Now, let's fast forward to a day in 2022. The feeling that day was incredible. I had just passed the interview for a job paying £140,000, a software engineer role based here in London, and the most challenging technical assessment I had ever done. My manager later told me, we hired you because we connected with you more than we did with the other candidates. Let me tell you right now, this is not luck. There is a lot that I do to prepare for my software interviews and ensure that I leave the top 1% impression. And today, I'm going to share with you my key tips that help me land those top software roles, because the market is becoming increasingly competitive and your ability to impress in a job interview is now more important than ever. Can you impress in an interview? Because that is the single largest determining factor in whether you get those big money roles. Even more so than experience. Because yes, you can have all the experience in the world. You could have 7 years with C++. But if you go to the interview and you flop it in the interview, they're not going to hire you. Or they might hire you and make a really weak salary offer because your interview was weak. You don't want that to happen. On the flip side, if you're inexperienced, but you can get your foot in the door to do an interview and you crush it in the interview, then they will take you on board. And this is a trick that I use every time I'm talking to a recruiter or a hiring manager. There's me back in the day with my 2 years of experience applying to roles that required 4 or 5 years of experience. The recruiter's on the phone expressing his doubts. He's like, hey Adam, your resume looks good on paper, but we're looking for someone with a little more experience. And I reply, hey Jack, because you know, in England all recruiters have the first name Jack. I say, hey Jack, I have 2 years experience on paper, but during those 2 years, I've studied non-stop and I'm at the same level as an engineer with 4 or 5 years of experience. I'm ready for this role. If you can get me a shot at the interview, I will work my magic in the interview and maybe even get us on the higher band of that salary range. And a few times that has paid off for me. So interviewing skills are massively important. I mean, not just in software, in life in general. And hey, you might have done some interviews already and found that you did okay, but now you're ready to take things to the next level. Don't worry, I got you. We're gonna look at how to prepare in the weeks before the interview, what to do during the interview, and importantly, what to do after the interview. Because yes, once the Zoom call is over, there's even a step that you can take to further ensure you get that nice job offer. My advice includes a secret trick that I promise you will not hear anywhere else. It is a trick that me and my inner circle use. Why am I sharing this trick with you? Well, we've already gone on to receive big salary roles. We know how the job market works, so now I'm ready to let you in on the secret. Before you prepare for interviews, first understand what you want to study. So whether you're applying for a purely front-end role or a back-end role or a full-stack role, outline the key technologies that you want to focus on, because then you know how you can focus your learning and preparation for the interview. For example, if you're a front-end developer, you want to focus on JavaScript, CSS, TypeScript, and a couple of other technologies. If you're a back-end developer, you might choose to focus on Golang, SQL, and MongoDB. Whatever it is, pick your core tech stack. Now that you have your core technologies lined out, go to ChatGPT and ask it for the top 50 programming interview questions in that category. And you can do this for whatever technology or concept you're studying for. Bear in mind that technologies move fast and ChatGPT might give you some outdated answers. And if you're feeling really lazy, then I've generated a whole list of programming interview questions for you. You can find a link for that down in the description. Next, if you're applying to a specific company, you can find out what they might ask you in the interview. Trick number 1, go on glassdoor.com, look for the company name and go to the tab for interviews. Down there, you can see reports of other engineers that have applied to the same company. They sometimes write down what they got asked in their interview. Another trick you can use, if you already know someone that works there, ask them what came up in the interview. Or go on LinkedIn and see if you have a LinkedIn connection at that company. Just drop them a message and say, hey, do you remember what you got asked in your interview? Worst cases, they don't tell you. Best cases, they give you some pointers and now you're ahead of the competition. And thirdly, if you are applying through a recruiter, ask the recruiter as much as possible about the interview process. Because usually they've sent a candidate to the same company before and that candidate tells the recruiter, oh, I got asked this and this in the interview, and they can pass on that useful knowledge to you. That's the technical stuff. The next set of questions you want to prepare for are behavioral questions. These are the questions like, what's your biggest weakness? Or tell me about a time where you failed to meet a project deadline. When you get asked behavioral questions, the best way to answer is by using the STAR technique. Situation, task, action, result. So you outline what happened, the situation, you outline the task that you had to fulfill, you outline the actions that you took, and finally finally define the positive result that you achieved. Here's a real example of a behavioral question that I got asked in a software interview and the star answer that I responded with. The question was, tell me about a time that you've handled conflict with a colleague. Back when I was working at a tech consultancy in London, I was working in a team of 3 or 4 developers. I noticed one of my colleagues, each time he made a pull request and I went to review his code, he would make the same mistakes in each pull request. It was stuff like poor variable naming, repeated code, and so on. I would make my comments on the pull request in GitLab. He would make the changes based on my comments and then publish his PR. And then the next PR would come in and it would be all the same thing again. It kind of got annoying having to write the same comments and give the same feedback on each pull request. So I needed to find a way to stop repeating myself and have me and my colleague align on how we wanted to write code. So I politely contacted my colleague directly on Slack. We agreed on some points and we disagreed on others. So to prevent us from having a debate in the pull request comments every time, we went to the senior developer and we said we should outline some coding standards that we all agree upon so that we don't have this debate every single time a PR comes through. And we did. We agreed upon some practices and we then ensured that every pull request adhered to those standards. So when the next PRs came in, my colleague was already following the agreed upon practices and our dev velocity greatly increased. So there's a behavioral question and the STAR technique that kind of reads like a story and finally finishes with how you resolve these situations. Now, the interviewer can ask you all sorts of behavioral questions. So how do you best prepare? Again, go to your trusty friend ChatGPT and ask for, top 50 behavioral questions. Then craft up an answer for each one following the STAR technique. Once you have your behavioral questions and your technical questions, the best way to practice is with a friend. Have them act as the interviewer and you act as the candidate for an hour, and they will read through each of the questions and you respond exactly like you would do in an interview. Now, we've looked at tech stack questions, company-specific questions, and behavioral questions. In the modern age, companies look for engineers who make performance optimizations so they don't end up writing code that looks like this, or this, or this. In the early 2000s, they wanted performant code so that running your program didn't cause the server to catch on fire. Nowadays, it's about achieving page load times under half a second for that seamless user experience. So it is important that you understand time complexity and big O notation. If those phrases sound completely alien to you, then don't worry, I've dropped some links in the description for you to get started. Ultimately, the best way to learn how to write performant code is through regular practice and by studying those who are best at it. How do you do this? Well, if you're a complete beginner, I recommend you start where I started out. Go to a site called codewars.com for a fun intro to coding challenges. Attempt a few questions and then go to the solutions tab and see what code other engineers have written. And there's always going to be a top voted answer, which is a nice, efficient solution. Read that answer, understand what's happening in the code, and then learn how to apply it to your own code. If you are an intermediate programmer, you may skip over Code Wars and go straight to LeetCode.com. LeetCode is where the sharpest engineers in the world go to sharpen their skills. It is a highly competitive platform with thousands of different questions. Format is really simple. Go to LeetCode, choose your programming language, pick a question, write your code, and click submit, and LeetCode will then run your code against all the tests. If your solution passes the tests, LeetCode will tell you how quickly your code ran compared to other code written by other engineers. Now, when you start LeetCode, here's some advice my mentor gave me for learning from LeetCode really fast. Don't stay stuck on any problem for too long. Ideally, you should spend no more than 15 minutes trying to tackle any one question. Read the question, give it a shot, but if you take more than 15 minutes and you're still stuck, just stop what you're doing, go to the solutions tab and read the code written by more senior engineers. There is how you learn and you absorb from the best. And what you can do to further cement your knowledge is go back to your answer and type out the method that you saw from the senior engineer. And that will really help you get used to the data structures and algorithms that are used at the highest levels. Getting good at LeetCode takes time, so don't be discouraged. It will get easier over time. Now, that is the bulk of the interview preparation that you can do before the interviews. And if you manage to follow all of that, then you're already ahead of most of the competition. But eventually you need to put your new skills to use and apply for some roles. I won't delve too deeply into how to apply because that's not the topic of this video, but I will say the 3 methods that work best for me. Number 1, reaching out to recruiters on LinkedIn. Number 2, emailing companies directly, or best of all, getting a referral from somebody who already works at the company. Because usually once you have a referral, you can skip at least one stage of the interview process. Now let's imagine you've cast your net and now you have some interviews lined up. Here is my super secret trick that me and my inner circle use to get a leg up on the competition. Always book your interview for just after lunchtime, ideally at 2 p.m, and do not eat anything beforehand. Why is this? Because after lunchtime, people are more agreeable, they feel slightly less competitive, and they're more sleepy now that they've had a meal. So your interviewer has just had their lunch and now they're conducting the interview. They probably want to get the interview over and done with and get on with their day. And even if you don't absolutely shine in the interview, they are more likely to pass you through to the next round sound than if you were to have your interview early in the morning or late in the afternoon. Don't believe me? This is backed up by science. A 2012 study on judges at parole hearings found that people that apply for parole and have their court hearing just after lunchtime are more likely to get their parole application approved than at other times during the day. Now, I've booked my interview for 2 p.m. and I've received the email invite to the interview. I go to the email invite, I see the name of the 1 or 2 people who are going to be interviewing me. I then go and search them by name on LinkedIn. And what I'll do is I'll look for little key things. Let's say it's the engineering manager and his name is, I don't know, Ed Frank. I go and search Ed Frank on LinkedIn. I see he did 3 years at Citibank where he worked on SQL sharding with an AWS cloud integration. Now I know there's a slightly higher chance he's going to ask me something to do with SQL or AWS if this is a back-end interview that we're doing. So I spend the hour or so before the interview just brushing up my knowledge on those areas. It's these small touches that can make the difference between a pass and a fail. Now when I'm in the interview, I've done all this preparation, but sometimes nerves take over and I forget exactly what I'm trying to say. I mean, there's a lot that you need to know, and let's be frank, who can remember all of this? When I was a junior dev and applying for JavaScript roles, one of the key questions that always comes up in an interview is explain the event loop in JavaScript. And I remember studying this, the call stack, the event queue, asynchronous queue, all of that stuff. But for some reason, when it came to the interviews, I could not remember whether the event loop checks the call stack first or the event queue. Just couldn't remember it. So I wrote down on a piece of paper, the event loop checks the call stack first, then it goes and looks at the event queue. And I stuck that piece of paper on the wall behind my monitor. And when it came to the day of the interview, the interviewer asked me, what is the event loop? I kind of looked up, as if I was pensive and deep in thought. And I was looking directly at the piece of paper, and then I gave the rest of the answer. And that saved me in a tight situation. Now that helps you remember the technical stuff. What about if they ask you to give more detail about your background? Sometimes what I'll do is I'll have the interview going on my right monitor, and I'll have my resume up on my left monitor, which has, the dates and the bullet points. Then if they ask me something really specific about my CV, I'll quickly glance at my left monitor and I'll have the information right there. It's easy, it's effective, and if you have 2 monitors, it's like free screen real estate. Next thing, first impressions count. Present well. Always dress 10% better than the engineers at the company you're applying to. What do I mean by that? If you're applying to a startup where they wear jewelry and hoodies and wacky hairstyles, then things are a bit relaxed. In your interview, ideally go with a smart casual look like this. And then if you're applying to a company where engineers dress a bit more smart casual, maybe they wear collared shirts, what you want to do is dress 10% better. So wear a proper white collared shirt. You can pop the button, but dress 10% better than the engineers that already apply there. This leaves a really, really good impression with your interviewers, and it shows that you're taking the interview seriously. Another thing I do is I always wear glasses in my interviews to appear a bit more academic. This seems to create a deeper connection between myself and my interviewers, and it's a trick that I will always use. Next thing, always check your technical, your audio, your camera setup before you begin. Go onto Google Meet, create your own private instant meeting, and have a look at how you present on the camera. See if your background can be adjusted. See if the lighting on your camera can be adjusted. Get your audio settings right. All of these touches mean that when the interviewer turns on the call, sees your face in beautiful HD, they have an idea that you are taking this interview seriously. I don't know why this is a mistake I see so many people make time and time again. They'll join an interview and then realize their headphones don't connect, spend the first 2 minutes fucking around in the interview. Oh, sorry, I need to go and get my headset. It really disrupts your flow at the start of the interview. I don't want to see any of you making this mistake. It's embarrassing, and frankly, it's completely avoidable. Instead, you want to be that smooth operator, camera on, perfect audio, and get straight in with the interview. Now that's the technical prep out of the way. What about the more human side of your interview? Remember, people love hearing their own name, so always address your interviewer by name right from the beginning of the interview. I will always open with greeting my interviewers. Hey Mark, hi Tim, thank you for giving me the opportunity to interview today, and then make sure to address your interviewers by name throughout the rest of the interview as well. Now here is the cherry on the cake. There is a question that comes up at the start of 90% of interviews, and it is so open-ended, you can either completely fuck it up or you can answer it so well that you make the next 45 minutes of your interview so much easier. And that phrase is, tell me a bit about yourself. This is your chance to tell them a nice story about your background, about your interests, to really highlight the areas of your technical expertise that are very impressive. So list your most impressive accolades, ignore the stuff that doesn't sound impressive, and leave a really strong impression right at the start of your interviews. Furthermore, be absolutely clear in your phrasing. It's not good enough to say, I did some stuff with GraphQL, I kind of worked with resolvers. It comes across as vague, unconfident, and weak. Instead, be firm and clear in your experience. I employed a GraphQL API interfacing with a Prisma ORM over a SQL database. Boom! Now you are the man. You're a salesman. The product is you. Now is not the time to be humble. I'm going to take it one step further for those of you that absolutely want to kill it in your interviews. When talking through your work experience, make it flow like a well-written story. Remember, your interviewer has seen your CV. He has an on-paper understanding of your background and experience, but now you can make it sound super interesting. Here's one way that I answer the phrase, tell me about yourself. I began my dev career as a purely front-end engineer, and that was great, but I was always curious about where the data came from and how the back-end worked. Essentially, I wanted to try my hand at full-stack engineering. So whilst working for my first employer, in my free time, I began learning about how databases worked, user authentication, and so on and so forth. And then after finishing the client project with my first employer, I took a break from work and I built a full-stack clone of Instagram using Ruby on Rails, React, TypeScript, and Redux. This is real, by the way. Link in the description if you're interested to see that project. And I continue. I had so much fun building this project that I made the switch to full-stack engineering full-time. I went on to work for a tech consultancy based in East London, and that was a great team. I have only good things to say about them. After about a year there, I was ready for my next challenge. My mentor reached out to me and he invited me to work at a startup that was in stealth mode with some really smart people, former FANG engineers working on some exciting technology. And excited by the idea of working with some really high-level engineers, I joined him at the startup. That's it. That's how I answer the question, tell me about yourself. I'll make it flow like a story and it's engaging for the interviewer. Now, it might feel like we're jumping around a bit and covering so much ground, and that's because we are. But I want you to be clued in on all of the tools that you have available to absolutely crush your interviews and get that big money job. So I'm not stopping. Here's the next trick. I want my interviewer to finish the interview and think, Adam is the perfect candidate. He is exactly who we're looking for. And how do I achieve that? By using the information they give me. I read the job description and I pick out some key phrases to target. If the job description says, we are looking for an engineer who is a self-starter and can work independently, then two things are going to happen. Firstly, when they ask me, tell me about yourself, somewhere in my answer, I'm going to mention how I like working independently. And secondly, I'm going to mention a specific example of when I worked independently and as a self-starter. So for me, that would be in 2022, I created a crypto news aggregator that brings together the most important stories in crypto, and now over 2,000 people use it every day. And that is true, by the way. For those of you that are interested in crypto, I'll drop you the link to my free tool down in the description. So we've covered the key things you should do. What about the things that you shouldn't do? Well, the main thing is don't bullshit. Do not ever guess or bullshit in your interview. Allow me to tell you a story about a time that I made this mistake. I had taught myself coding and I was gunning to get my first coding job. My mentor referred me to a job at the investment bank Credit Suisse. It was a mid-level software engineer job for like 50K. The first stage interview was a phone screen. I passed that, no problems. Then I passed the second stage, which was a light technical interview, no problems. Then came the third and final stage interview. When I joined the Zoom call, there were 6 people interviewing me. 6. It was the team tech lead and 5 of the engineers that I would be working with. I was a bit taken aback for a moment, but I thought, fuck it, it is what it is. I'm prepared. I'm not going to let this faze me. And so we started the interview. And for the first 30 minutes, I was absolutely smashing it. They were asking me questions about React. They were asking me questions about TypeScript, and I was cruising. Then I made a huge mistake. We were talking about React testing library, and one of their engineers asked me if I would use React testing library to test React state. And I didn't know the answer. I thought about it for a second. I said, I think we can do that. Ding, ding, ding. I've triggered their bullshit detector. In fact, I made 2 mistakes here. Firstly, I said something false because you would not test React state using React testing library. And secondly, I sounded uncertain in my answer. I said, I think we can do that. Anytime you're in an interview and you say, I think, it sounds like you're guessing. It sounds like bullshit. If you're doing interviews, eliminate the phrase, I think, or I guess from your vocabulary. Instead, you want to sound confident and you want to sound firm in your answers. So yeah, in that interview, even though it was the final round and I had been cruising the hiring process up to this point, they didn't hire me based off that one mistake that I made where I bullshitted in an interview. So lesson learned, I never guessed in an interview again after that. Much of this interview advice I discovered myself, but some of it I received from my 2 mentors. If you're interested in getting ahead in your career, I explain how you can connect with a solid mentor in my recent video, How to Find a Mentor. Now guys, we've looked at what you can do before the interview, we've looked at what you can do after the interview, we've covered a lot. If you follow follow all of my advice so far, you are well positioned to smash your interviews and get that nice offer email at the end of the day saying, congratulations, we're excited to offer you a position of senior software engineer at a salary of $1 million. But there is one more thing you must do to leave a great lasting impression. The day after the interview, email your interviewers thanking them for their time and pick out a specific part of the interview that you are interested in and then repeat it back to them. Here is the exact follow-up email that I sent to my first company before they made me an offer. It can be a simple email, but it shows that you care about joining their team. And all of these small touches compound to make a huge difference between you and the second best candidate. Frankly, if you follow all the advice I've given so far, it's not even about passing the interview anymore. It's about how big of a salary they'll offer you at the end of the process. Now, you might have watched all this and be thinking, I know an engineer, he hardly ever prepares for interviews and he seems to smash it every single time. I want you to completely ignore that, because that developer could be doing a lot of preparation but not telling you about it. Like the guy in school that claims he never studies but somehow magically gets 95% on the exam. People want their accomplishments to appear effortless. On top of that, there are elements of luck and natural talent that play a factor. I want you to eliminate all of that from your mind. You are going to be so well prepared that luck is not even a factor. I believe you chose to watch this video because you are genuinely ready to put the work in and you want to understand what goes on in high-level interviews and how to smash them. Eventually, after all this preparation, it is time to pull the trigger and apply to some high-level roles. Go online, find 5 different roles and apply to them directly. By directly, I mean find the email address of the engineering manager, send him or her a personalized email saying how you want to work at the company and that you want to bring your skills to the team. Why delay your own success? You're more prepared than you think.